So good afternoon. Welcome to the next of our webinar series from LSEC. LSEC is an association of cybersecurity companies, has been around for about 2 decades. And we started to organize these series of activities quite some time ago to give a bit of an insight on what's happening in cybersecurity world in the terms of innovations, but also additional challenges that we see coming forward. LSEC is an organization whereby we bring together the expertise of many different cybersecurity vendors, nearly 500 of them, and system integrators and academic institutions, research institutes, which are really investigating the challenges and potential that cybersecurity can bring in that space. Since quite some time, we have been investigating the impact on industrial cybersecurity. And for that reason, we've invited today an interesting company and indeed also an interesting technology that is helping manufacturing companies and industrial companies in detecting what they have as assets, which is, of course, one of the first things that we would need to do in order to be able to protect them. Not only for industrial cybersecurity companies, also for the wider area in terms of companies that mainly manage and administer IT services, but still highly relevant for industrial cybersecurity. Earlier on in these last couple of weeks, we have seen a couple of interesting presentations by Torion and by Secudea, who have indicated directly what the necessity is to take a holistic risk-based approach when it comes to cybersecurity. And specifically, therefore, we wanted to make sure that we can provide an idea on how to do asset discovery, but also asset management. So 2 very important things. For this reason, we've invited Lansweeper today. But before we start, let me give you a little bit of background on why this is absolutely necessary. So from our side, we bring a bit of expertise sharing every Tuesday noon, but also on other days, where we bring some of the experts around the table and focusing on some of the challenges that are there. We also give trainings and we work on innovative projects looking towards the future, for instance, on how artificial intelligence, but also things like industrial IoT will be impacting the world of cybersecurity. We are looking towards different applications for this, and we take into consideration how an attacker would approach this specific environment. This is a traditional model which is called the cyber kill chain, developed quite a number of years ago by Lockheed Martin. And one of the first aspects that you can see here is the reconnaissance. The reconnaissance phase is one of the most important stages in cybersecurity landscape, because it's this really the moment whereby an attacker will try to understand what assets a company has from the outside in, sometimes also from within the inside through different means. And so that's the reason why, at least as a company yourself, you need to know what type of assets and elements that you have within your organization. It's not only important to know what those assets are, it's also important to understand which vulnerabilities you have with those assets and also how you can basically try to protect them and mitigate potential risks of those. So what we tend to have as an approach is a model like this, based upon a standard IEC 62443 model, which is taking a very risk-based approach and then trying to specify different layers of security and isolating all of these different layers. But again, in order to be able to do that, you need to know what you have on board, and then you can specify that in terms of both the application as well as the different systems and the related networks. It's not only IEC 62443 that's working on this principle. There's also many other standards that have the same concept, and that start from the same logic, namely to understand what the different assets are that you have on the network. Some time ago, we have developed this cybersecurity control framework for industrial platforms, which is actually coming from an activity that we do called Connected Factories. And here you see that we have identified definitely the monitoring of different systems as one of the first things that an organization would need to do. So it's really one of the very basic elements that any organization will need to start from when it wants to go towards cybersecurity and doing an effective cybersecurity strategy and operation. Also, when we look into the future, while we try to integrate different new technologies, as well as industrial IoT, you can see that also from those new frameworks, the monitoring aspect is one of the more important components. And this is also why we think that it is very necessary to put that really on the table. What this results into is getting an understanding of what different elements we have on the network up to the level of applications, and then making connections with all of these different elements, and then showing how this really looks like at the very end. We could end up with quite a large group of applications and systems, and that's the reason why we need to look a little bit also towards the future and work with those types of data intelligently and build different algorithms that can work on the data coming out of the network and out of the different systems. In order to get to that level, we need to do the basic first, and that's why we invited Maarten Saeys from Lansweeper, a company not too far away here in Belgium. Really one of the companies which is working already for quite a number of years in this domain, not specifically from a cybersecurity perspective only, but really to support companies in understanding their assets and also helping them to manage those assets. Maarten, are you there?
I am here, Ulrich.
Hi, good afternoon. How are you doing today?
I'm fine, how are you?
Thanks for joining in, and thanks also for wanting to do this. We have asked you to prepare a bit a perspective on what Lansweeper is doing in that space, but maybe also give a little bit of the perspective from your end, what you're seeing and what some of the best practices are also in this domain, and why we should actually consider also from your side the detection and the understanding of which assets we have on our networks and on our operations. The floor is yours.
Thank you, absolutely. Well, hello everyone, my name is Maarten Saeys. I am the Chief Product Officer here at Lansweeper. And as Ulrich already mentioned, the core of what we do is gathering a single pane of glass on any IT estate out there. And I'll start off with the why of why we're doing that. And I think I can't make it more tangible for people in the security space than giving you this list of acronyms which everyone undoubtedly has either heard of or has wrestled with in their careers. And whether you're talking ISO, whether it's the one for cybersecurity, whether it's the one for IT asset management, or actually a couple of other ones out there as well. COVID 2019, not too old, HIPAA, ETIL, syscontrols. I'll dive into a bit more practical detail on those further down the explanation. Or the TOGAF standard. I mean, if you look at all of those, either you will find a dedicated section or a full chapter dedicated to what's usually called inventory of hardware and or software or IT asset management practices. But in the end, it can be boiled down to a very simple concept. Know what you have, what's running on it, and who's using it and has access to it. And that seems like a very simple question. It's not that complicated to understand, but to actually do that and to truly know what you have out there in your IT estate, and knowing is a heck of a lot more, of course, than knowing a host name, an IP address, maybe a MAC address, and that's about it. There's a lot more to knowing than just having your list in Excel. But as Ulrich already mentioned, we do that and we focus on getting that single pane of glass, and not just getting it, but also maintaining it for quite a number of scenarios and use cases. Of course, security is one of the big use cases, one of the big scenarios in which knowing what you have is just primordial. It's not the 99% that you know that's out there that will usually end up being the problem. It's the 1% that you don't know was out there that will end up giving you troubles. And the real reason why that simple question I put forward at the beginning is proving so difficult to answer is, you could call it the proliferation of IT assets over time, being driven by such things as now 5G emerging, bring your own device, increasing mobility of assets, IoT, industrial IoT as well, of course, and essentially any innovation that increases the compute power, increases the storage capabilities, and so on, those in turn have a direct impact on the complexity of an IT estate. And that means that it's not just the types of devices, it's also the types of entities that you're dealing with. It is no longer only the physical devices, it's virtualized environments as well. It's virtualized environments on premises, but also in cloud environments. It is also the hybrid situation of those two worlds and the interconnectivity between an on-premise and a cloud environment. Private cloud now also increasingly gaining momentum. And over time, there has been a lot of innovation and continuous development, you could say, out there in the market that has increased the complexity of an IT environment. And right now, it is really taking off. It is exponentially increasing and ticking up, where all of those innovations that came about were the objective of the IT department to actually implement those and to leverage those to support the business. And all in the same while, that increasing complexity and implementing those technologies put a tremendous amount of pressure on infrastructure management, IT business management, the likes of governance and budgeting, service desks, cloud and the migration to cloud and the management of cloud, and security, of course, first and foremost. And as these become more complex, the need for a solid IT inventory becomes more and more important, because the question of what do I have, who's using it, and what's running on it is increasingly becoming more difficult to answer. And there's a bigger and bigger gap that people have to catch up on in terms of, knowing what's running out there, because there's usually so much legacy and so much things out there already that gathering the overview in the first place just becomes such a tremendous task. But it is a very important thing to get done, because it simplifies and makes a lot of the other tasks which IT departments have, like security, service desk, CMDBs, and the likes, a heck of a lot more easier to do right. So if across all of these scenarios, and there's a couple of additional ones on this slide, if all of these require the same fundamental inventory and overview of what's out there, then we at Lansweeper say, well, why not leverage the same ground truth across all of those scenarios? That does not just decomplicate the amount of sources you have to control what's out there, but it also creates a common foundation, a common lingo, if you will, for those different departments to communicate with one another. There are very often system administrators out there that, of course, interact with the security people. They have to then go and patch those machines, which from a security perspective are potentially just IP addresses, but from an infrastructure perspective, you need more context. If you get your ground truth from the same source, you are de facto speaking the same language. And that is really what the whole vision of Lansweeper is, having that same fundamental data available across all of those scenarios and use cases. And that is our core focus, is and always will be. There's three very straightforward steps that we feel that you need to have in place before you can really, well, gather that overview, but also leverage it to its fullest potential. First step is, of course, discovery, right? So discovering and gathering all of the information. I'll dive into a bit more detail on discovery in just a few, because I will focus the majority of showing Lansweeper and what we have in there on the two outer circles. I'll talk a bit more about discovery and how we do that in the coming 3 slides. So once you've discovered your environment and you have your, essentially your users, your applications, and then your endpoints, and you have the 3 of those and how they relate to one another, That's the core. And then you have to start off by managing that actively. Of course, just having the overview doesn't do you any good if you don't adequately manage it and you maintain it and you control and you label which softwares are authorized to be out there on your network and which ones aren't, which ones ought to be blacklisted. The same with devices, the same with users, checking user privileges and so on. So it's not just about discovering it, but also managing that data, labeling it, controlling it, and then leveraging it across all of those scenarios. And that's really what the Connect Circle is all about. It is both from a people perspective as well as a systems perspective. So you want to, of course, integrate all of your solutions that you have in those different scenarios into the same data source, so they start speaking the same language. But you also want to connect across all of those scenarios from a more person-oriented perspective. But I'll dive into those in just a few. So dialing it back to the discovery element, what we discover or what you should be discovering is, well, everything, but everything is of course a very, very broad term. But you can already see it on the slide. We have both users on here, but users of course come in many different shapes and sizes. Active Directory users versus O365 users versus Exchange users. But then you also have regular users, local users, administrator users, and so on. You have your actual hardware out there. You have your printers, your routers, your firewalls, servers, workstations, and so on. But then you also, of course, have the different operating systems, Windows, Linux, Mac out there, Unix as well. And then also all software and applications. That will be your SQL servers, your Exchange, and so on. But then also the location of your endpoints is important. You have locally virtualized via VMware, Citrix, Hyper-V. You have cloud environments, AWS, Azure, Google Cloud, and the likes. And then you also have the devices that are usually forgotten about, the more mobile devices, being Android, iOS, Windows Phone, or any specific flavor which is used for IoT devices. Talking about IoT and OT specifically here, this is how we very simply put, gather that foundational data overview. Essentially, the first thing that you have to do is, of course, detect that something is out there. And there are both passive and active methods in terms of gathering that overview. And we do both. So we have what we call asset radar, which listens on the network for assets that connect to the environment and get an IP address and therefore connect. And we immediately go off and try to figure out as much as we possibly can about that device, both from the package that we intercepted and analyzed to know that the device was there in the first place, but also through the second step, which is querying, which is getting information on those various devices. And Lansweeper scans on quite a different number of protocols. So we have a sort of a progressive disclosure type approach to our scanning. For example, if it's a Windows, 135 will be open. You will try and authenticate to the device with Windows credentials. But we'll also leverage SNMP, Telnet, SIP, HTTP, HTTPS, SSH for Mac and Linux devices, and so on. So we have a very broad range of different protocols that we try, of course, not all try out at the very same time, but progressively see which asset we're dealing with, which endpoint we're dealing with, and then how we can fetch information off of it, either with credential-based authentication methods, or if there's a credential-less method, like, for example, UPnP, then we would also leverage that. And then the last bucket is one that's often forgotten, and that's federate. And by federate, we mean that, as mentioned before, there are an awful lot of systems out there that have an inventory of sorts. Active Directory, you have SCCM, you have mobile device management solutions. So you have all of these systems out there that have their proprietary version of an inventory. And we don't compete with those whatsoever. Actually, we federate all of those sources and all pull them together. As such, we integrate with Active Directory, with SCCM, with AirWatch, Intune, O365, you name it, all those different environments, and we pull it all together. And then where the real magic happens is that we always end up with a singular asset. No matter how many different sources we detected it in, we end up with a single user and we end up with a single application that is then all correlated and combined together in the same UI. So because we go across these three core steps and we pull information in every potential way that we can, whether it is from external systems, like for example, AWS and Azure on the API, and we also go and contact the devices themselves directly and compile that overview, we achieve a very exhaustive overview of everything that is out there, including OT, including IoT, though of course we are continuously making improvements in our abilities to scan those types of devices and environments. And of course, as you probably know all too well, OT and IoT do have their own specific protocols that we can be using, and we are continuously developing what we are able to do and how broadly and how deeply we are able to gather data together. And then the last slide here, and then we will get into the weeds, and I will actually pull up Lansweeper and give you some overviews and some things that you could be doing when you actually have that information, that up-to-date inventory available. And this is my segue into that section of the presentation. So you have your foundational data, you've uncovered and discovered that. And then of course you have to start, as mentioned, managing it. So you have to run the reports that you need on that data to perform the controls, find out where the vulnerability is out, find out where the misconfigurations out, find out where the risks are. And I'll show you a couple of practical examples in just a few. You have to be able to browse, of course, also all of that data, go and dig into a specific user, go and dig into a specific piece of software to see where that version with the vulnerability is installed on and so on. So you need to be able to look at your data from all sides, both on a high level and on a specific individual entity level. Dashboards also very critical, being able to in one screen have all of the things in front of you, that you need to keep an eye on, and also having very good capabilities in terms of making the things pop that require your attention. Custom actions is something that we also offer, so it's not just about detection and knowing and monitoring. It is also about the ability to take action. From within Lansweeper specifically, you can trigger remote desktop sessions, for example. You can have scripts run which are triggered through the UI and so on. But the majority of the focus, of course, is still on building the data set, giving you the overview. And then we do allow you very well and highly customizable functionalities to be able to perform the actions that you need to perform on those things that come floating to the top. The two at the bottom are very specifically geared towards the cloud platform that we're building, set for release in a couple of months. What I'm about to show you is our on-premises version, which can be completely standalone. Cloud platform, of course, will offer a way to federate data in a cloud environment. And on top of that data, we will do data enrichment. So we will, for starters, normalize software information which we get. Microsoft Inc. period will all be normalized into the same catalog. And on top of that data, we will also be connecting software and their versions to the NIST vulnerability data catalog. So that's also readily available for reporting straight into Lansweeper. And then the last one, API. While there are already integrations with Lansweeper, they integrate on the database backend. So it's an ODBC connection usually that's used to extract or put data into Lansweeper. In cloud, there will be a fully fledged integrations and app system with an API for both bulk and webhook functionalities. But without further ado, let me pull up, I closed it off apparently, there we go. Main page. There we go. So let me pull up the Lansweeper web console here for you. So as you can see, the Lansweeper frontend is a web interface. So this is a website hosted IS Express. And then as mentioned in the background, the data is stored in a central SQL database. And then you have the option of installing one or multiple scanning services out in your network, which are centrally configured to go and detect, query, and federate data across your IT estate. For illustrational purposes, we will use the built-in admin option here, which of course for fully deployed Lansweeper installations is not an option. It integrates fully with Active Directory and others for authentication into the web console. Now, the first thing that we land on are the dashboards, and this is where I will spend the majority of the time left, because the dashboards are where you really start seeing the core of Lansweeper shine. I could be showing you how you configure Lansweeper for scanning. I could be showing you our deployment capabilities. I could be showing you all kinds of other nifty settings and configurations, and we have a lot of them. But really the core value of Lansweeper lies in it once you have that data, which is by the way very straightforward to set up, deploying Lansweeper and configuring it for a first run in an environment of 2,000 to 3,000 assets. We are talking a matter of hours, not days, never days. If the environment is straightforward and simple and manageable with a central installation, we're even talking minutes and not hours even. Once you have all the data pulled together, this will immediately start populating and popping up. Because again, Lansweeper scans the environment and keeps continuously monitoring it. So any changes that occur are immediately reflected in the dashboards here. So what you're looking at is the main page. On the left-hand side, you see everything which is more asset related. In the middle, I created a column specifically for user-based information. On the right-hand side, a quick overview of software information. I have much more detailed dashboards coming up in just a few, but this is just to showcase you the three core objects of Lansweeper. So you have your last seen assets in this particular case, which is very easily accessible, of course, also fully configurable. And as you can already see, you can click on through to these pages, boom, and then you dive in straight to the details of this device. Let me tell you, there's a heck of a lot of detail to Lansweeper, from full software installations all the way to hardware-related information and the likes. But I'll steer away from the very nitty-gritty details and keep it high level for the couple of minutes left. As I mentioned before, we also, of course, federate data. And this is a good example. This is a CCM widget where you can see the assets in Lansweeper, the assets in SCCM, and we cross-check, we cross-reference, and we do that for pretty much every federation data discovery integration that we have, because the whole point is not for us to compete with any of the solutions, it's to make them better and make them more complete, and make sure that you have every Windows device that should be in Active Directory in Active Directory. Make sure that SCCM is managing and getting all of the patches deployed, which you are configuring in there. Making sure that in Intune, all of your remote assets are actually being managed and have been onboarded in Intune, and so on and so on. So on the left-hand side, then we can also get, for example, an overview of all of the different models from the different vendors that you have in your environments. Also, vendor management is something that Lansweeper can help you out with. And then asset type overview, as you can see, very versatile from cloud environments. We also integrate with G Suite for Chrome OS devices, Windows NAS systems, even the monitors connected to the devices that we scan, we pick up as separate assets and keep an eye on. In the middle, your users, so the last seen users, so the ones that we know are now logged on in the environment and also on which device they are logged on. Users, but then in this particular case, tied to Active Directory information as well. And there's more user goodness to come in the next couple of tabs, which I'll run you guys through. On the right-hand side, try to give you a summary. So we have the Windows operating specific info. This particular case, the version overview, service specs installed, operating systems out there, pretty high level. All, of course, available, and you can click on through to these. So again, you can go top level, see where the issues are. This is the list of all the devices in our environment with that particular trait. And then you can always click on through to the detail page of that device. And also it provides you a way to hop to other assets which are related. In this particular case, we see which switch that this machine is physically connected to. Again, pulling it into the top level. Here's software information, just as an example, a good overview of all the different software publishers out there and how many software installations we have detected out there on the network of those particular publishers. Always a very interesting one when you first run Lansweeper. There are always publishers out there that you didn't know you had to account for or even monitor for. Diving into software a bit more deeply, again on the left-hand side, less graphical list of all of the software publishers in there. In the middle here, all of the changes as well. So as mentioned, it's not just about getting the overview, it's about keeping the overview and especially knowing what changed. And for software, this is like, for example, like for hardware, very relevant. Usually in terms of security, you want to know that changes occurred and you want to especially verify whether those changes were allowed to occur in the first place. But you also want the option to investigate a certain incident and look at the status of an asset, a user, or a piece of software at that given point in time. If a software vulnerability is shown, then you do not just is exploited in your network, then you do not want to go and know which machines are vulnerable right now, but you want to know which machines have been vulnerable up until that point in time, because the vulnerability could have been exploited way before that. And that's what Lansweeper also allows you to do. It keeps track of all of those changes and gives you all of that information readily available. But of course, we also go quite a bit more deeply. We also have not just the client software, but we also have some server-oriented softwares and applications that we dive a bit deeper into. Like SQL in this particular case, we scan SQL servers, but also the databases which reside on those servers. And also their sizes and the likes, which is of course maybe not that relevant for security, but as you can imagine for just infrastructure management, the system administrators, highly relevant information. And then on the right-hand side, again, you have your alert report in this particular case, some IE configurations which are not allowed, operating systems that might be missing the latest service packs and so on. But we also, of course, report on services running on devices and whether those configurations are out of order or not. Diving into hardware here, this is a bit more tangible. The different types and the different chassis which are out there, any settings that are out of the ordinary, ages, how old are your machines out there based on the BIOS. There's other fields that you could be using to detect that. But then let's dive into the virtualized environments as well. So you already see VMware Citrix. We also do this for Hyper-V, where this is a perfect example. So in this particular case, we've scanned Active Directory, we've scanned vCenter, we have scanned the physical ESXi hosts, and we have also scanned the virtual guests. So that's 4 sources, all combined in one top-down overview. And as you can see here, these, for example, we know that there's a device out there, but we haven't been able to contact the effective guest. This is, we have detected the asset via vCenter, and we've also detected it directly. And we know, as you can see, which physical machine it's hosted on, and so on and so on. This is a perfect example of why it's so important to not just scan the endpoints and know that they're out there and know their names, but that you also have to federate data from existing systems into one single pane of glass. We do the same for Citrix, as mentioned before. Our Citrix test environment is not as exhaustive as the VMware in here. But as you can see, same thing, even data stores and pool settings and so on. Cloud, pretty similar approach, actually. So here we have AWS and Azure. So you're not just able to know that virtual machines are in your environments by addressing the AWS and the Azure API and authenticating and reading out the subscription information. But you can also deploy Lansweeper to scan cloud networks and cloud environments. And then again, we combine everything into a single pane of glass with all the details you saw before and the cloud contextual information we get from the different APIs. This one is a more practical overview of what I showed you earlier. So it is not just the endpoints themselves, but when we scan these endpoints, we try to connect as much information together. Like, for example, Lansweeper has the ability to show you which switch interfaces particular devices are connected to. So Lansweeper is able to get a complete topology overview of how things are connected throughout your environments. Especially interesting when you are looking for certain attack chains in your network. So you can not just know which endpoints are vulnerable with Lansweeper, but also how those are interconnected. And also you can mark which ones are exposed to the internet. And as such, we have, for example, we have partners that use Lansweeper data to run algorithms and see which attack chains people could follow throughout a network to exploit a specific vulnerability. Active Directory, I won't dig in too much to this one, but again, a good overview of how we combine all of the information together. And of course, if you click through on these, you will see the detailed list of all the devices Lansweeper picked up under those specific OUs in this case. Exchange information, again, one of those applications that we go that extra mile for. We don't just scan the software installation, but we actually pull information off of it. In this particular case, user-based information, mailboxes, and the likes. Office 365, another one of those environments that we pull information on. And in this particular case, we combine Active Directory users, local users, and O365 users on the email address, and give you again that single pane of glass into that particular user and all of the accounts that they have throughout your organization's systems. End of life information. I'll give you a more visual overview in the Power BI tab here. This is one of the integrations you can do with Lansweeper. But in this case, we have an overview of all SQL servers out there which are nearing and which are end of life or end of maintenance. And in this particular case, same with Office. But this extends to any piece of software because Lansweeper is able to pick them all up. So again, we focus on getting you the data, and then we have a large report library which you can use, which we publish almost daily reports into. Like, for example, every Patch Tuesday that comes about, we launch a report which shows you exactly which devices out there in your network are not compliant with the latest Patch Tuesday updates yet. And then the syscontrols here, I'll stop a little bit longer here. So here is where specifically for syscontrols, we dug a little bit deeper. So here are, in this particular case, an overview of the new devices found. So the ones you want to keep a close eye on. And then software, the changes in the last 7 days. And here you can really see what changed, which ones were removed, which ones were added. Whether it was just a version increment or whether it's an actual new software installation. On the left-hand side here, a nice overview that really pops of any devices that are new or any ones that were there before but have not been seen in the past X number of days. And that can be for a variety of reasons, either technical or whether they are stolen or whether for any other reason. But the point is that, of course, you have to know why they're not there anymore and be able to manage that. And then here, some more informational stuff. We also retrieve warranty information specifically for Dell, HP, Lenovo, Toshiba, and quite a few of the other big ones out there. Then software, as mentioned before, so any changes out there, but also whether antivirus is installed on the machines that it ought to be, whether that's enabled or not. Here are some more topical vulnerabilities. So Linux sudo vulnerability, which was recently exposed. Zoom, which is very recent as well. We launched reports that show you where you're vulnerable almost every single day. Then here again, the end of life overviews, more informational overviews that where there might not, where certain software might not be installed, where it ought to have been installed. And then for users, you can also do configuration checks. Users with DAD, count locked out, password expired. You also have the means to detect local administrators which are not authorized to be there. That's also an option and a functionality that Lansweeper has to offer. Yeah, some other reports here. I won't go into too much detail because the last thing that I want to show you is in this particular case, okay, I wasn't expecting this. This is a way for you to embed Power BI into the user interface. There we go. So this is a Power BI report that pulls from the SQL database that Lansweeper has data in, and then just gives you more options to analyze that. To build this, we implemented a few metadata tables, which is then tied to the overall data model, and lo and behold, you are able to use Power BI and all of its all of its features to trim and chop the data in Lansweeper up any which way, shape, or form that you like. In that particular case, end of life information. In this particular case, an overview of all of your SQL servers, the number of databases, their additions, and the likes. In this particular case, again, Office end of life overview. And here you have an overview of, if I'm not mistaken, the Bluekeep vulnerability, but also the advice in the report of which KBs you ought to install to address that particular issue. So in closing, because I mean, I could talk for hours and hours going into all of the details and the features and the configuration that Lansweeper has to offer. But again, it's all about detection, knowing what's out there. Once you know that's out there, keep the overview. And of course, you continuously leverage the insights and the information that you have through all of the functionalities which I've displayed here to date. So I'll wrap it up here. I think I've already went a little bit over time. Any questions, feel free to contact Lansweeper. We have sales and support at lansweeper.com, which you can contact us, or me personally, it's product@lansweeper.com, and I will happily address any questions that you have.
Well, thank you very much, Maarten, for this very extensive overview. And I'm happy to see that not always on my end that things sometimes go wrong. So I think it's been very useful in any case to get this level of insight on what Lansweeper and the technology that you're using to do the detection can actually offer, the type of information, the type of detail and insight also in the machines, their applications. You were talking at some point in time, and maybe if you still have your screen somewhere on there, you mentioned something also of more a security related report. Do you think you can pull that up for us? Is that something that you have readily available in terms of, I think it was in relation to the existing vulnerabilities. Is that correct?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. There we go. So I'll share my screen again. So I mean, there's a large variety, right? I think the best way to showcase it is to go to our website here and to show you our report library, where there's quite a few on here. One of them would be specific vulnerabilities that we publish, and then you get the full overview here. Patch Tuesdays, sort of compilation reports, Ryuk in this case, Bluekeep, and so on.
Okay, so but are these then also integrated within the reporting of the platform of the Power BI that you just showed?
They can, absolutely. So for now, the on-premises solution I showed you and demo to you is a manual process. So this is the syntax which you need, which you can just copy paste into the report editor, and then you get your overview. Of course, in the cloud platform, this will be a fully automated system where all of these reports get fed to you, and then you have the option to say yay or nay, whether you actually want to implement them.
Okay. So this provides also an impact, in this case, for instance, on Patch Tuesday. And when it comes to the CVEs, which are published almost also on a daily basis, or maybe other types of intelligence that's coming from other partners, those, as you mentioned at the very beginning, would also likely to be integrated in the cloud platform.
Yeah, absolutely. So in the cloud platform, we'll go, because this in the end is, I mean, for example, this Firefox, it is a vulnerability. It's a manual report just specifically for these vulnerabilities. In the cloud platform, we will A, normalize the inbound software information, and then B, match and link it to actual CPEs and in turn CVEs to more automatically show you where all of your vulnerabilities are, because these are just the 0 days and the high impact ones and the ones which are being exploited, because of course, yeah, having reports for all of them is if you have to do them manually is not very feasible. Though in cloud, it will be fully automated in the background.
Right. So I guess specifically on top of the traditional security type of information that that one would be seeking for from security operations perspective, you offer also quite a lot of detail on, for instance, the licensing schemes, the systems behind it. Is that also how you would position yourself, for instance, against technologies out there such as EDR, NDR? We actually had a discussion about this morning as well. Or do you see, because of course we're focusing very much here on the security aspect for obvious reasons, but where would other types of advantages be in that sense? You mentioned some of them also at the beginning, but maybe good to put that in a refreshment as well.
Oh yeah, absolutely. So I mean, indeed, at the beginning, I referenced a number of scenarios for which the data in Lansweeper can be used, and I think the most primordial one would be infrastructure management, the work that system administrators do day in, day out, and that really comes and shines when you go to the detailed pages. And why is that? Well, 15 years ago, the very first version of Lansweeper was built by a system administrator who was tasked with getting an overview of the inventory. So that's really where things kicked off. So from an infrastructure management perspective, we get a really broad picture. But for example, for software asset management and license compliance, we have integrations, for example, with License Dashboard, which is a solution that takes our data and then matches that with license entitlements. Because we provide, for example, for SQL Server, we know how many cores there are on the hosts, we know how many databases are running, their sizes. So we have all of the pieces of information that you would need on a particular, in this case, SQL Server, to do a licensing calculation against, though we do not aim to be a software asset management tool. We do not aim to be a exclusive cybersecurity tool. Same goes for IT governance and budgeting. Same goes for cloud migration. Whereas, for example, you can export from Lansweeper reports that you can upload into the Azure Migration Assessment Portal, Azure Migrate, and that then returns you a result with which devices are eligible or could be a good idea to migrate to cloud. And to do so, we, for example, also offer the option to monitor devices based on how much CPU, disk, and I/O that they have. And those data parameters are then not very relevant for a security scenario, but very relevant to do these cloud migrations. And again, that's what we always focus on. So getting as much information as consistently as possible to drive as many different scenarios as possible. That's really where Lansweeper comes to shine.
Okay, in terms of best practices, how would you see that most of your customers today are using Lansweeper for what purpose are they mainly using it today?
There's two situations out there. I'd say two high-level situations. On the one hand side, excuse me, we have customers using Lansweeper for one of those specific scenarios, which is usually the infrastructure, which is usually the system administrator perspective. Another one would be service desk people that get a customer, an internal user on the line and have to find out which machine they're on and whether they actually rebooted when they claim they had. So those are the more scenario specific ones. And they tune Lansweeper, of course, to the specific problem they're looking to solve. So that would be the one where a specific department or a specific problem is being solved. And Lansweeper is not fully leveraged to its fullest capabilities. But then you also have your global rollouts, which we're seeing more and more of in bigger corporations where Lansweeper is deployed globally. And there, the biggest use case, I'd say, would be getting that single pane of glass I was talking about earlier and pulling that to the highest level of IT management. And that's that repository then being used across all of the other departments, across all of the scenarios to, for example, when a question is being asked, how many of X do we have, or we are impacted by a vulnerability, which machines do we have to investigate, that you don't get 4 different answers from 4 different people and departments, but that they always go to the same source and answer that question, which can be for licensing, which can be for cloud, which can be for security, and that's always answered consistently throughout. I think those would be the 2 main situations that we have to date. Okay, thanks for that.
In today's activity, we mainly address industrial cybersecurity. Specifically in manufacturing environments, we see that there's almost none of the companies that we meet have an idea or an oversight of their assets and the systems. What's your experience there in that space? Industrial machines. We talk about Windows XP. We talk about Windows 7. Sometimes even Windows 3X. What's the experience there? Have you been able to also detect all of the within?
Yeah.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah. Well, I mean, for sure, we actually have a disproportionate amount of manufacturing companies in the manufacturing space. I think very specifically because we scan very brand and vendor agnostic. I guess you have other comparable / competing solutions out there, but what you'll tend to see is that they always have a specific scenario in mind. SAM, clouds, infrastructure management, data center management, you name it. They always have a specific niche area in mind. And because Lansweeper was implemented so broadly, and we go more on a protocol level, then we go after a particular type of device or a particular type of software. We are very well capable of uncovering more OT-oriented devices, and that's not just manufacturing and factory environments, but that also includes healthcare environments and the likes. And there we are able to capture everything from very old systems to also very, very new systems. And also I think a really key driver there is that we've been at this for 15 years already. So for 15 years, this has been the core of what we've done. So everything that was even remotely being used 15 years ago is supported and has always been supported throughout the 15-year life cycle, and we've continuously pulled new things in. So yeah, we definitely cover OT very well, though we can of course always do a better job, and we are going to do so in the future by investigating more OT specific protocols to read, for example, PLCs and other systems a lot better than we do to date.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, I think especially, of course, in the domain of the industry, that's quite needed, because there's so many rogue devices out there that companies simply forgot about. But those, of course, are the ones that are then being used to drop in ransomware attacks. I guess you're by scanning basically what's happening in the network, you get this this pretty good oversight perspective. Daniel is asking here if from the discovery that you're doing, you can also automatically build a network diagram, or at least an overview of what's around. Is that something that you can do? Is automatically get to some sort of a network diagram perspective?
Absolutely, yeah. So let me pull up here. Let's take this one. Yeah, of course, bad example. So as I showed earlier, when Lansweeper uncovers the different endpoints and federates data, we don't just report back on that particular endpoint, but for example, for switches here, when we scan switches, we scan all their interfaces, and we know which MAC addresses are registered on those specific interfaces. And then we give you the overview of, there we go, on which interface, which device is connected. So you have these kinds of relations throughout Lansweeper in its entirety, from virtualized environments, as I showed in the widget, all the way to the network level, which you see right here. So from very different perspectives, actually, Lansweeper is able to create your topology or your network map, depending on whether you're looking from a virtualized environment perspective or a network perspective, or a user or software perspective. All of the dependencies between those core three objects are mapped and are available in the database. So it's only a matter of taking the data and extracting it in such a way that those particular dependencies or relations become visible. And then within Lansweeper itself, for example, there is no topology widget, though in, for example, Power BI, it's a very straightforward thing to, with a single report, build a topology overview of both virtualized environments as well as network topologies.
Okay. Early this morning, we had this perspective from more an NDR point of view, which also gave some insights in how to use, for instance, AI techniques, machine learning, behavioral analytics. Here, you're expecting lots from an operator, basically the system administrator, as you mentioned, or the service desk. How do you see this moving forward, also for Lansweeper? Would you be able to start investigating on, because you have lots of structured data, to do some additional analysis on this, and then to what it needs to relate to, for instance?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think, I mean, moving forward, I think the biggest hurdle that we've identified for customers is not the configuration of Lansweeper, because yeah, the sysadmin knows this inside out, so it's not difficult to configure or set up. It is, yeah, just the vastness of data. I think we have over 600 tables, thousands and thousands of fields. It's about, yeah, taking that data and looking at it from an angle in such a way that is relevant to the objective that you have, which can be, as mentioned before, quite variable. For us, the next step really is the cloud platform, where for now, on premises, as you saw with the report library, we've tried to make ends meet and continuously push out reports and help people out in terms of detecting vulnerabilities and using it for different scenarios. We also have a couple of partners that integrate with Lansweeper data, pull it in, and then work their magic, whether that's Cybersecurity and so on. There's a couple on the website to date. But the cloud platform is really where we want to scale that up, and really also want to connect our users and our customers to a lot of partners that we actually have, service partners within those specific scenarios, and they can then drive those different views, if you will, those reports, those analytics on top of the data, but also connect users together and have users help each other out and together create a library of sorts that is driven by the community and then maintained and managed by Lansweeper. And that's really the vision that we have in store for Lansweeper, because you can do so much with the data that we don't want to limit our customers to what you can do with it. And we also don't want to limit ourselves in terms of the value we can provide to just all doing it from the Lansweeper side. It's really about creating and well, it's not creating, but it's really leveraging the community that we already have to date across 25,000 customers and connecting those up and having them drive the value of Lansweeper data forward. Okay,
makes perfect sense. Have you ever discovered that you haven't discovered the device? Are they still, after you've done the sweep, are there still rogue devices that that are there? And if so, what do you do about it?
To be honest, there used to be. Now there are not anymore since a couple of months. Well, there's one thing that we did before already, which is an integration with Active Directory, that the moment a Windows device logs on, we pick it up. But that's of course just the Windows devices, and those have to be of course AD onboarded. So that's of course just a segment of the environment. What we launched a couple of months ago is, as I mentioned, as I touched on before, is what we call Asset Radar. And I'll show you right here. Essentially, this is an overview of what Lansweeper picked up on the network. So it's not active, it's passive. It listens for, in this particular case, ARP packages, essentially devices connecting to the network and saying, hello, I'm here, this is my IP address, and just making themselves known. So we plug into the bare, well, the lowest level network protocols available and listen on those. And as you can see, once we know or once we've picked them up, you can either automatically or manually add them to the scanning queue and we go pick them up. So we used to miss things, but now we don't anymore.
Okay, and from this, is it possible, according to what you know now, that somebody could put in a rogue device, basically mask the IP address of another device, and then still stay in there for quite some time before it can be spotted?
No, actually, because the uniqueness of a device in Lansweeper is not done on the IP address or even the MAC address as such. It's a combination of different parameters. Once it's scanned, of course. So actually, you would be able to use Lansweeper to see whether there are devices which are spoofing an IP address here and essentially making themselves known under a different IP address of an existing device. That's something you would actually very tangibly see in this list here.
Yeah, because here I also see lots of VMwares. Somehow you could always try to avoid, but it's good that it's been picked up. Have you ever seen results, which is also something that some of our industrial cybersecurity people are a bit worried about? Have you seen any impact coming from scans or sweeps, which have resulted in devices failing or networks being distorted, and so an impact that's actually causing much more damage than actually benefit?
Very rarely, because you have so much control over the way you configure Lansweeper, and especially with the introduction of this, essentially you can do the first initial sniff, you could even call it, completely without impacting any of the devices. And then you can select which ones you want to further investigate. But of course, the investigation itself is active. So that means we're going to reach out to the device. Now, there's two important things there. There's one, the impact that we have on the overall network, which is something that with the scanning queue, we limit, so we don't mass message across a network. we have a queue and we handle the IP addresses that you've listed in there for Lansweeper to go scan, or the host names, etc. And we go through them. There's of course threads which run simultaneously, but the user actually has complete control over how many threads run at the same time. And then there's also the impact on the individual device. So, and that's where the progressive disclosure scanning, as I called it earlier, really comes in. We don't en masse check all of the ports, and we don't try en masse authentications of all kinds. It's a very step-by-step process where we've optimized it over the years and continue to optimize it to figure out which device we're dealing with by, for example, checking if it's a Windows device, a very non-intrusive, port 135. If that's not the case, then we move on to the next smaller check. And for the vast majority of devices, within 1, 2 to maximum 3 different checks, we actually know fairly well what we're dealing with, and have not probed or poked the device all too much.
Great. I think you've answered all of the questions. Thank you very much again for this. And it's been a great insight and overview. And I think it's very useful in any case for many of our partners and users out there which are looking to get into their first steps and how to get a grip on some of their challenges in relation to system administration in this case, but also towards the cybersecurity, and especially because of those different rogue devices and legacy systems, as we know, which are available. So thanks again, Maarten, for sharing this with us, and good luck, I would say, also with the further cloud development. The moment that you're ready to present here in this forum what you have as new features, you're very welcome to do so. So please join in maybe in a couple of months later on again to get some of that expertise to share with our participants. Okay, so that brings me back to a bit of promotion on some of the activities that we have planned for. So today, I'd say we have yet one more of the network and information security webinars, but in the very near future, namely tomorrow, we'll be talking again about the activities happening in the world of industrial digital transformation, whereby especially also this audience will be very much welcome to join in. As most of you know, we have also our activities in digital transformation, including a field lab on condition-based maintenance. And so for tomorrow, we've invited our partners from the Netherlands, in the case of smart maintenance and world-class maintenance. So we hope to be able to get some insights on best practices on what's happening in the Netherlands, amongst others in Camelot, which is the petrochemical hub in the Maastricht area. So that's definitely one of the things that will be popping up for tomorrow morning. And then on Thursday morning, we'll continue our activities on cybersecurity, in this case with an idea about how to govern and how to manage digital identities today and towards the future. So with these ideas and suggestions, I would say thanks again for joining in. Also to you again, thank you very much, Maarten, for sharing this with us. And I'm hoping to see you definitely shortly in a couple of months again. And maybe already a little bit earlier on for having a beer, since yesterday we have our restaurants and activities open again. So we should meet up for a beer and a drink or something of the kind.
You most certainly will. Thank you very much for having me, Ulrich.
All right. Have a good afternoon, and see you and stay safe.